What's going on, a Black Baseball Mixtape family? Flubba Boys here, and we're in the booth high above your favorite ballpark. And you know what I love about the show is talking with people who are a lot more smarter than I about aspects of sports and storytelling within that sport, those who support the sport. Now, today, I want to talk about an issue that really affects a lot of our live chats. See, some people watch our shows and say, it's difficult. There's challenges to making sure their kids are ready to play the game. And so I went to the experts because I don't know about that because I'm not a dad myself. Please welcome Chris Bjork and Bill Hoynes, the authors of More Than a Game, How Youth Sports is Changing the Way We Parent. What's going on, gentlemen?
Hi, thanks for having us.
Yeah,
The
thank you.
pleasure is all mine. We're going to talk about sports today and youth sports because, again, the kids are the future, or so I've heard. Well, I gotta talk about the impetus of this first. And Chris, I'm gonna start with you. When you think about youth sports and the parents' role in that, what was the inspiration of putting that together and making this book a possibility?
Well, Bill and I both have a long history of involvement in youth sports. And so we were just having a conversation one day, and we both felt strongly that the world of youth sports that we experienced as kids didn't look anything like what goes on today. And as parents of young kids at the time, we were perplexed, and it was really hard to negotiate that world. So we decided it would be great to do a project that would give parents the information they needed to make good decisions for their kids, because it's so hard to get accurate information these days. Everything is sensationalized. So you can find lots of reports saying that the sports world is just messed up and kids are suffering, or you get these glory tales of how if kids just spent more time practicing and have the right coaches, they will make it to the pros. And the reality is somewhere in the middle, and we wanted to give parents that kind of information.
Yeah, one of the things that we first started with was talking to parents and learning what their experiences are, having to support their kids and the kind of pressures they face. Really expensive to be involved as a parent in youth sports. A lot of pressure to give up everything else and specialize in just one sport. A big question about, can you cash in at the end? And the answer for most parents is no, they're not going to. So what we learned a lot about parents feeling very stressed about making the right decisions, but not feeling prepared to make those decisions. And so we're hoping the book gives parents some really learning from each other, because a lot of what we learned is from talking to parents. And Chris noted this before, we've both been involved for a long time. Our kids are grown up now, but we coached our kids when they were in Little League and followed them all the way through. They're playing youth ball, high school ball. One of my kids played college ball. And so we were around the game a lot and got to observe a lot of it, and learn a lot about really what the experience is in and around the youth sports ball field.
We also discovered that it's so hard to get a healthy perspective when you're in the middle of it. When your kids are playing and you're so committed to trying to help them succeed, you lose perspective. And we thought if we did this research project, as Bill said, interviewed parents, interviewed coaches, we could give them a better understanding of what's going on so that they don't just follow what everyone else is doing because they don't know what they should be doing.
My experience was a little bit different growing up because I was into karate because I really wanted to be a Power Ranger. So I didn't really do team sports in the community level. But from the outside looking in, it felt like it was kind of a community thing. Joe's Pizza would give you little $3 uniforms. You went out there on Saturdays or Wednesday nights, and it was kind of deal. But within my time period, it felt like that whole youth sports movement has evolved. There are companies, and there are travel companies, and there are companies that help you get involved with companies. It can be very intimidating for parents. Bill, I want to start with you. To me, from the outside looking in, the evolution felt swift. Was that really the case?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was quite swift. I mean, we're not that old. We're old, but we're not that old. But certainly, when we were kids in the '70s playing ball, it was community based. It was recreational. You're right. It was the local pizza place or hardware store, and all the kids on your team were kids who lived in your neighborhood. Now that recreational, local, community based programming, starting in the 1980s. And then really accelerating in the early 2000s, that's really started to decline. And there's been, I guess entrepreneurs really have taken an opportunity to try to create these pay-for-play programs. So it's a tens of billions of dollar industry, and there's more and more players trying to find ways to offer opportunities to families, but they have to pay for those opportunities. So I would say there's been a relationship between the rise in travel sports and pay to play sports, as we call them, and the decline of local community-based recreational sports. And the consequence of that, I think, is that on the one hand, many parents think their only choice is to do the expensive travel related programs because they don't really see great opportunities for their kids at the local community-based level. And on the other hand, these things that were vibrant parts of the community are much weaker now. And there's a real loss, not just for the kids playing, but for all of those community members who would come out to the ballpark and sponsor the teams and sort of take a pride in there being community-based sports. So one of the messages that Chris and I thought we were going to tell in the book was in the return from COVID, we were hoping that there would be a reconnection with community-based programs. I don't really think that's happened, but we do think that it would be a real benefit for many parents, players, if there were stronger community-based programs and if there wasn't so much pressure to say, let's figure out how to pay to get our kids in the most competitive travel program.
You had mentioned that you feel like parents don't have much of a choice, and I do feel like the dangling carrot seems to be, hey, go with us if you got scouts so your kids can be looked at. But is that kind of like the casino putting the big pictures of the people win the jackpot on the front door to give you a false sense of hope? Chris, what do you think?
Well, I think parents do have a choice. They just don't always realize it. So there are multiple options in terms of recreational leagues. Their kids can still play for Little League or play CYO baseball or whatever and be healthy and still have chances to do whatever they want to do when they're older. But the pressures become really intense for them to go all in, to specialize before they even finish elementary school. And so parents aren't aware that they can resist that pressure. And the kids will probably be better off if they do.
Mm-hmm.
I think, though, there are a couple of dynamics that make this really hard for parents. One is that many of the other parents who have kids who are already somewhat skilled ball players at age 9, 10, 11 are taking their kids out of the local leagues and putting them in these elite or regional or travel programs. So if your kid is really excited about playing ball and they're kind of good at it, you might say, I want them to play against good competition. I want them to play with their friends, and their friends have already left. And then the other is that we learned from talking to college coaches, particularly Division III college coaches, they don't love this at all. But the world of recruiting is not organized around community or even school-based programs. It's organized around travel-based and elite and academy programs. So the college coaches are coming to see players play, not those who excel in high school, but those who are playing on these travel programs and going to tournaments all around. So again, parents are thinking, I have a choice, but I want my kid to have this opportunity. They don't know whether the opportunity is realistic or not, but they're feeling pressured to join this program, even if it isn't really what they want to do. And we were surprised at how many parents really just felt like we don't have a choice. We have to do this.
But why do you think that is? Is it just because these D3 schools, they don't have the tentacles to go out to these regional programs, or are these paid programs, these regional travel programs, just better? Is better the wrong word here? But why is that disconnect apparent?
I think that it's just an easy way for these college coaches to see a lot of talented players over a very short period of time. So they can go to, the Cooperstown Dreams baseball tournament and see hundreds of kids who are pretty good that have potential, and they don't have to drive to all the different high schools. But one interesting thing we found was we interviewed a lot of college coaches, and the college coaches are really worried about this trend, that they think that kids suffer when they start playing one sport all year round when their bodies haven't developed. And so they recommend that kids sample, that they play multiple sports until their bodies are developed, until they know what they want to do, and that they will actually be in good position to, at a later date, decide to play college, whatever, or not.
Yeah, so this is probably something you've talked to other people who know a lot more than we do about this. But one of the big questions for baseball is what's the story with all these injuries, particularly pitchers getting injured. At a level that is, I still remember fondly the pitchers who threw 300 innings a season in the major leagues when I was a kid. Not those things don't happen anymore. One of the things that we suspect, and from talking to coaches and physical therapists and medical professionals, is that the specialization at such a young age has players, using only one muscle group from the time they're 8 as they're, over and over again. And they're getting overuse injuries at age 15 now or at age 17 now. And so we think there is something to be concerned about this, quick specialization, because it's perceived to be valuable for your kids to develop to be a better ball player if you do that. But there are health risks associated with it, and there may be mental health risks as well, in terms of that kind of pressure, as opposed to being a well-rounded, athletic, activity-oriented, young person.
Yeah. And I have to give you a shout out for the advanced copy of More Than a Game, How Youth Sports is Changing the Way We Parent. You do go in detail about the concept of specialization for students. And I know not every sport can translate to every other sport, but I do think there is a bit of self-centered is in the United States. We look at Europe, we look at South America, and we say those youth are in football or soccer academies when they're 6, they're 7, they're playing real drills. Why not? I can transfer that to the particular sport. But you're right, doing the same thing like as a job before you even know what your favorite ice cream flavor is could be really bad for at least the mental side, if not the physical one. But what's a parent to do, Bill, at this point? Do you have them sampled? Do you say, hey, look, you're really good at this team? Do you encourage to go in one angle? Like, what's a parent to do?
Yeah, well, we encourage parents to have their kids engage in multiple activities, not just sports, right? So we're not saying play all sports. We're saying give your kids opportunities as much as you can. Let them develop their own interests. And as I think it's a really great example about ice cream flavors, right? They're so young. Who knows what they're going to be both interested in and good at such a young age? So give them lots of opportunities. They don't have to be these pay-to-play expensive opportunities. There still are, as Chris noted, recreational programs. But I guess the other thing that I think we do try to convey in the book is we hope that parents can pull back a little bit from the kind of fantasy, which it really is for most people, a fantasy, others might call it a dream, of being able to be so successful that you are going to get a scholarship or you're going to play professionally. Those are very uncommon. And when that becomes, articulated as the principal goal, it not only leads to lots of disappointment because most people don't achieve it, but it also leads to people making decisions that aren't in their best interest. So we hope that, what we found is parents of kids as young as 8, 9, 10 are already thinking about the ways their kids are going to get offered scholarships and play professionally at such a young age. So we hope people delay those decisions, give their kids an opportunity to figure out what it is that they want to do, and not start making those assumptions when their kids are still in elementary school.
Feels like the Hunger Games, Chris. It's almost like if my kid's good enough, you can beat this tuition up. What say you about this? It feels like there is a line that I can remember being very distinct between youth and amateur sports and professional, want to get paid or not, but it's blurring. I'm not sure if it's because of these travel teams or on the other side, the rise of NIL deals. Chris, I want to ask you this: is there even a window for a kid to be a kid and play these games as we thought we should be intended?
Well, it's getting harder and harder, but again, parents do have some agency, and we encourage them to think about what their long-term goals are for their kids and not just follow the pack. And one thing that's happened that's making that more difficult is that, as we mentioned before, when we were kids, if you were on a travel team, that meant you were truly elite. They were very, very few of them. And it suggested that you were headed for great things. Now, because of these entrepreneurs out to make as much money as they can, almost anyone can play on a travel team. And what happens because of that is that families get this notion that because their kid plays for whatever, travel, soccer, baseball, hockey, whatever, that they are going to make it to the NCAA and get a college scholarship. And so there's this huge bottleneck of kids who are on this pathway that their parents think that is going to deliver them to the NCAA, but the number of scholarship hasn't got bigger, so that there are lots of kids who have inflated dreams that aren't going to be realized. If you think that only 1% of all high school athletes eventually get a full scholarship to play at the college level, what their parents think is going to happen just isn't real.
You know, when I was a kid, we would have Friday night sparring at my karate dojo, and I was serviceable. Like there's days I won and I celebrated, and there's days and I didn't win, and we went to McDonald's afterwards. But we all knew that next Friday will be another sparring session. The time I went to the regional competition, I got a bronze medal. I medaled, but I was devastated because the stakes were higher. So let me ask you this from a parent on the mental side of things. You have a child that's good enough to be on these teams that you want to push and maybe be like the sport, but they fail. Like this must be a whole uncharted territory for parents to deal with, huh, Bill?
Yeah, this is such a great question. And one of the things that I would say I personally, I know Chris and I talked much about that I found most rewarding about the research we did for this book was learning from parents, particularly those of kids that were older who had experienced failure. And one of the things that those parents told us was they really valued the lessons their kids learned from participating in sports more than they valued the accolades, the winning, the championships, all those plastic trophies in their basements. What they valued was what they referred to as life lessons. We didn't use this language, but almost everyone we talked to who had an older kid talked about the life lessons of their kids. And one of those was resilience. One of those was learning to live with failure. One of those was hard work. Being able to be part of a team, all of these things that for the kids who aren't going to be professional athletes, they weren't as skilled as you. They didn't bronze medal. And they still learned a lot, and they had a really positive experience. And at the end of the day, what we hope that people engage with sports in a way that supports those experiences and doesn't make it all this kind of all or nothing. You're going to succeed or you're going to fail, and you're ashamed when you fail. You know, as we all know, as we're baseball fans here, failure is the norm in baseball, right? So, right. And in youth sports, that's the same thing. Kids, they learn to cope with failure, and when their parents can really embrace that that's part of what the experience is, it's a much better experience from the mental health standpoint, and I would say also just from the maturing standpoint.
Yeah.
And sure, what's that? Parent, you know, the parents we talked to would say what they really were hoping their kids would get out of this was these life lessons like persistence, cooperation, resilience. But a lot of times they had trouble following through on that once they started paying these fees, once they started driving their kids to different states, once they saw that, you know, the hope that their kid might get a scholarship. But we really hope people will not lose sight of what got them into sports in the beginning, because that's when their kids are going to thrive. And if they're, you know, have the potential to play at the D1 level, they're going to make it there anyway.
Yeah. This is kind of a very small, almost an anecdotal thing I've heard from a couple of parents in my social circle about the pushing of their kids to do sports. I've heard the potential to make money. I heard the friendship thing, but there's almost another thing that didn't really assail me when I was a kid, and that was the screen, the third and fourth screens, right? The phones, the laptops and stuff. Some parents are out there that goes, look, I want my kid outside doing something. Whatever it is, I'll do it. This is something that I've noticed. I mean, I'm a certain age where I had a Game Boy. I mean, I had a Game Gear, but this is a whole nother level. Chris, I want to start with you. Is there another challenge for parents to get their kid to detach, to actually pick up a ball and bat or whatever to play games in real life with real people?
Well, I'm so glad you asked that question, because a lot of what has been written about youth sports today treats it as if sports is just a demonic activity, that our kids are being destroyed. But I think it's really important to recognize, and a lot of parents told us that they really valued the opportunities that sports provided for their kids to interact with other kids, to face physical and mental challenges and whatnot. And this is especially true of girls. So we talked to lots of parents who said that by playing sports, their daughters developed a healthy body image, that they felt that they could be leaders whereas in other cases, boys tended to dominate. So we don't want to demonize sports. We think that sports have a whole lot to offer to kids. We're still pro sports. We're just cautioning people to be careful how much pressure they put on their kids.
Yeah, I think it is such a great point that kids today have so much technology in their pocket. And, that's not even a metaphor, right? It really is in their pocket.
Yeah.
And getting outside and interacting with real humans and moving their bodies. And those are incredibly valuable. And we hope that the youth sports world can thrive in a way that doesn't make it only for those parents who have money or only for those kids who are identified as having talent. That it become an activity for all kinds of kids and all kinds of families. And I think that's been one of our concerns, is that it's narrowing who participates in sports because of how expensive it is and because of how much pressure is associated with it. And we hope that, that the more people think about what they want out of youth sports, the more they're going to find ways to engage, regardless of whether their kid is skilled or not, and whether they have to play on some highly competitive team. You can play for the joy of the game.
Yeah. Kind of a personal question, starting with you, Bill. Where the division of labor between where the parenting ends and the space you allow a coach to coach, and sometimes they may cross paths when it comes to life philosophies. Any tips and tricks to navigate those waters potentially?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, one thing I would say is I do think that it's really important for parents who are really engaged with their kids to have their kids have opportunities to play for coaches who aren't their parents. I saw last night the home run derby. Cal Raleigh's father pitched to him in the home run derby. Pretty awesome. And I think his brother was the catcher. Pretty awesome that there's a family affair there. But I do think that lots of kids benefit from having other adults that they get to relate to and learn from, and lots of parents benefit from taking a step back from coaching their kids. So from being around so many parents and players, I always found it that moment when there was a separation was really helpful for both kids and parents alike. And lots of times parents resisted it because they wanted to be right there all the way. But I think it was a much better experience for their kids when they got to be not only coached by the parent. The parent still gets to talk to you after the game and all the rest, right? But not only the parent.
Chris?
One thing I would point out is also that there are some wonderful coaches out there. And so we followed a few teams pretty closely for a couple of years and got to see really admirable coaches do wonderful things with kids. But there are also a lot of losers out there, right? There are a lot, especially as the costs have gone up. There's this pressure on parents on coaches to produce wins, to have their teams climb up the rankings. And so I would just say, parents, find the really stellar coaches. They're out there, and your kid will benefit from them. And it's worth doing a little homework. Go watch coaches, see how they interact with kids, see which ones are supportive and which ones just scream at the kids, and sign your kids up for those teams, and they'll benefit.
Yeah, it always seems like it's one more thing you got to add on to things, right? We're talking about more than a game, how youth sports is changing the way we parent. They have the authors here. I got to ask about the tag team aspect of getting this book together. Was it by committee? Did one person focus on a chapter? Chris, I'm going to start with you. What was the process like to get this to light?
Well, it started, one of the great things about writing this book was just the many conversations I had with Bill, reflecting on our own experiences, our kids' experiences, and what we saw. So it evolved kind of organically. And another thing I'd add is we had a bunch of college students as research students, research assistants, and all of them had played sports. So it was great to talk to them. And we would just have weekly meetings and talk about what we had observed and what parents and coaches had told us, and then piece together theories that explain what we saw that was going on. And the college students in particular were invaluable.
All right, Bill, do you guys really fight then? Because, this chapter's all wrong. No headlocks, no takedowns. You guys totally in agreement?
No takedowns. We wrote very well together. I think, one of us would take the lead in drafting something. We'd talk about the ideas. We'd pass that along to the other one who would edit it and make changes. I actually don't think we ever had any real disagreements, but we definitely had conversations where Chris would say, I think we should emphasize this more than that, or I'm not sure that you said that the best way. But, we've been working together for a long time. We're old friends. One thing that we probably didn't say is we started talking about this book about 10 years before it came out. So there was a lot of time that we were just sort of bouncing around ideas, trying to think about what we were doing. Things slowed down a lot during COVID. So we had a lot of time to work on this, and it was really fun to work together.
Yeah, no, it definitely comes across because it is very information rich, but it isn't dense, which I appreciate. Right, it's a very fine line to make sure it's entertaining when you give me the science.
I'm so glad to hear that, because most of what we published before has been academic, and we really wanted this book to be accessible to parents, to players, to coaches, so that they could kind of get sucked in and connect with what we have to say.
You know what? My favorite topic, if you mind me going off the rails a bit, is talking about the youth that, for whatever reason, decides not to play anymore. Right? When you're a kid and you play, that is kind of like your identity. At least when I was a kid, oh, that's Jason. He's on the football team. But if Jason no longer plays football anymore, it's almost like, who am I? Chris, let me ask you first. The idea of that, to make that a chapter, or really go into details of that, was intentional. But had that really evolved when you decided from the idea stage to the actual execution of going through that cycle change for some of these athletes?
Absolutely. And we came to that realization after talking to so many athletes, and not almost all of the college students that we interviewed said that they decided to stop playing either at the end of high school, at some point in college, and not a single one regretted it. They valued the skills they developed. They valued the friends they had made, the persistence, all the life lessons that Bill mentioned, but they were ready to move on. And that's a really good reason why you want to give your kids options. And so if they're doing multiple things when they're younger, if they at some point get injured, get burnt out, decide they don't want to play hockey anymore, they can move on easily to another activity. Whereas if they're figure skating 7 days a week from the time they're 8 years old, what happens when they do get injured or can't play anymore? Then there's a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, we also learned about this from the parent perspective, which is parents who felt a sense of loss when their kids stopped playing, because that they organized their family lives around driving their kids to games and practices, around hanging out with the other families, around weekend tournaments, whatever it might have been. And that's interesting to your point about, kids having the identity as the football player. Well, a lot of the parents actually adopted the identity as, I'm the parent of the football player or of the soccer player. So it was, I really enjoyed those conversations with parents, learning about how they coped with their own sense of managing change and recognizing that it might have been harder for them than it was for their kids. Like their kids were ready to move on, but they weren't quite ready to move on. And they needed to go through some kind of a process to be able to cope with that experience of change and like I said, and loss in many respects. But it was great when we had two of our research assistants were high school athletes who didn't play in college, and they said they were really happy they didn't. And they had so it was a very interesting thing to hear. So many people cope with this transition that, as we note in the book, everyone experiences. Right. Yeah. Even the elite players, their careers end. LeBron James will stop playing basketball at some point.
Prove it. No, I'm just kidding. I want to give a shout out to my mom that when she signed the parental permission slip for me to play football in high school, she says, if you don't do this anymore, you have to do student government. I was like, whatever. And like 3 weeks later, I'm taking a class to do student government. So she had the vision. Yes. I just love talking about this. Again, I have no children of my own, but I do sit in stands now. Now I'm becoming middle-aged adjacent, and I wonder about the state of the game for the next generation. Yeah. And I just appreciate just hanging and chatting with you. But is there anything that I can do? I know that I'm a member of the community. I could probably take up youth coaching to help ensure that. But someone's watching right now, listening right now, who may not have kids of their own, knowing this information from your book, is there anything they can help that movement at all? Start with you, Chris.
I would say volunteer for the local Little League or CYIO basketball, whatnot, because those clubs are finding it really difficult to compete against these profit-driven travel teams, academies, and whatnot. And they're so important. And I think all three of us really benefited from playing at that recreational level. And so whatever parents can do, adults, whether or not they have kids, to support local youth sports organizations, we would really appreciate it.
Yeah, I think that's really important, is that recreational community-based programs need volunteers, and they need people who point to them as valuable places for kids to spend their time. So, anything you can do to support those programs that we see in our own communities, it's harder and harder to support those programs. And I worry about that. We certainly want sports to be available to as many kids as possible because there's real benefit to getting out there on the field.
Yeah. And just following up on that, one kind of disturbing trend that we observed is that sports have become increasingly accessible only to people with a lot of money. That there's a real correlation between who has money and whose kids play sports. And also there's a racial component because, as we know, race and class are all tied to this. And so local teams need support so that not just the rich kids can play.
Yeah. Thank you so much for saying that. Before we wind this down here, there's a question I ask everyone who's on In the Booth. So you can't leave. The doors have been locked. And that's about the state of baseball. I know that from your perspective, you're familiar with a smattering of sports. But this was a question about Major League Baseball as it is right now. I'm starting with you, Chris. Is baseball cool, and why or why not?
I say absolutely it's cool, but I think minor league baseball is the coolest. I love going to see the Hudson Valley Renegades down the road.
The Renegades? Oh, come on!
Well, I know they're linked with the Yankees, so you probably like them. But or I can't even think of the name of that local team where all the players do musical numbers in between innings. I just think that minor league baseball is incredibly fun, not expensive, and accessible to a lot of people.
The Bananas? What's the Bananas?
Yeah.
Okay. What about you, Bill?
Baseball is cool. I've always thought baseball is cool since I was a little kid, and now I'm old adjacent, not middle-aged adjacent. So, baseball is very cool, and the reason why is because it both harks back to the past, to tradition, but it also provides opportunities for people to think newly and experience, new stars, new rules in Major League Baseball, new ballparks, new innovations. So you're old and new, you're young and old. Baseball is as cool as it gets, and I love the game.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Go Cyclones, the Mets affiliate. That's just me.
Yeah.
That's me. That's realizing. But here's the fun part, gentlemen. We talked about more than a game, how youth sports is changing the way we parent. But if someone's listening right now and they want to pick up a copy of their own or learn more about you as a tandem, how they go about doing that?
It's all available on Amazon. It's one reason we went with the publisher we did is that they would publish it at a very reasonable price. So it's not an expensive book. And I would just add, we'd love to hear from parents and coaches about their experiences. So feel free to email us, or I'm on Twitter at Chris Bjork 6.
Yeah, the easiest way to find us is we're both professors at Vassar College, Vassar. And if you go to vassar.edu, you can find our pages with information about us and how to contact us. We'd love to talk with people about their experiences or answer your questions. And like Chris said, it came out originally in paperback, so it's an affordable book that we hope people read. That was the goal, was to make this as widely available as possible.
And if you don't have a lot of money, buy a copy and then share it with your friends.
Yeah, I like that. That's a community-based thing. Thanks so much for being on the show. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
My pleasure. It's great talking to you.
Yeah, great. All right. Bye-bye.